Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
Today we have another Russian case for you. And again, please forgive me if I do not pronounce names correctly. I'm doing my best, but it's hard. But before we dive into the case today, Kelly, what's your question?
So my question is a little more current, and I think there's a lot of fun answers, but my question is, what has been your favorite part of starting the podcast?
Oh, that's a good question. I think as a whole, I'm just having a lot of fun with it. I really like doing the research and writing up the script.
Yeah.
I know I was joking at one point a while ago with you being like, what? Like, it's so much easier now to write a 10-page script for this than it ever was to write a 10-page paper in college.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's just so much more fun.
Yeah, you're right. The script, I like writing the script too. Just because I'm like a writer by hobby, and I just like writing the script. But I also...
Yeah, just like finding like all of the different information and like inputting it into a cohesive story. Because you read all of these articles, you're not going to find one article that tells the whole story.
Yeah.
So you're writing bits and pieces kind of as you go and being able to pull everything together into this one chronological cohesive piece is just really fun, I think.
And you do a great job. You're a great storyteller.
Oh, well, thank you. This writing is not my forte. And so I basically write as if I am trying to come up with it off the top of my head.
Yeah.
As if I'm like just saying it.
I think that's all writing really is. It's just like get down your thoughts and then, check them out later before you say them on a hot mic.
Exactly.
I think it was Hemingway who said, write drunk and edit sober.
There you go. And if any of you were to ever see my script as we're kind of going through this, I don't follow half of it. I kind of just like skim read and just randomly talk. So I'm not sure how much of the writing has too much to do with it, but it's a foundation.
Yeah.
And I also have to say Rigby is being very cute next to me. And I'm going to take a picture and we'll post it on our Instagram.
Yes, co-host.
He is just like sleeping in the window and it is so incredibly cute. I will text it to you, Kelly.
Yes. I have my, if I have to later, you guys, I might have to shut my window. I do have my window open today. Because,
I do too. I didn't even think of that.
Yes, the weather, fair listener, the weather in Chicago is beautiful today. So
it's about 75.
Yeah,
sunny.
The morning dog walk was really top tier today.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I haven't been outside, but I do have my windows open. So hopefully you won't hear sirens or helicopters or whatever's out there today.
Right. But if you do hear a siren, just remember it's Chicago.
Right.
Sam.
But let's get into Colin's story.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry. You can cut this out if you want, but it's also very funny because our listeners may have heard it in the background before. My husband is a genius and said to me literally the other day, this is what it's going to be like our 19th episode. And Adam,
21st. 22nd?
My husband.
This is after the 20th. I know that.
We're at more than 20. And my husband finally says to me, why don't you unplug the ice maker while you guys are recording? My brain blew up all over the wall. I was like, oh my God. Why? Why don't I? Oh my God.
You know what? I should give you, I actually have a handful of them and I've had them for a very long time, but it's an outlet. It's like a kind of like those like outlet extenders, but it's a Bluetooth where you can turn it on and off on your phone.
Ooh, fancy. Yeah,
I have like a whole package of them. I'd give you one of them.
Okay. I just had to get that in there because I was like, that is so funny. It took us 20 episodes.
No, that is really funny because you don't know how much we edit that out and it still winds up in there because it's like during the conversation.
Yep. And now I finally wised up and unplugged the ice maker.
Oh, that is really funny.
I apologize for interrupting you, but it felt really relevant.
No, I love it. All right, so let's get into Colin's story. Colin Madsen was born on February 18th, 1991 in Kirksville, Missouri. So yeah, he's right around our age.
He is only 1 month older than me. Full stop. I was also 91. Wow, that's horrible.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
So he's, right in our age.
Yeah.
And he was raised 2 hours away from where he was born in Jefferson City, Missouri. And it was kind of difficult to find a ton of background on Colin, but reading his obituary, you can see how well accomplished he was. And this is kind of before social media really kicked off.
Right.
Well, not necessarily before social media really kicked off, but like his high school years.
Yeah, that era was...
MySpace was around, but
yeah,
that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, and the social media footprint in this era was just so much smaller. Because, like, if he was born the same year as me, then he's going to school at the same time as me, and we are the last generation that experienced life before the internet, so all of us weren't carrying around...
Right.
We weren't carrying around a phone all the time, so I imagine it must have been a little harder to find, like, a digital footprint on him.
Exactly. But Colin had graduated Terre Haute South High School in 2009. He then went on to Columbia College, and then eventually attended the University of Missouri, where he studied the Russian language. In 2013, he actually went to Russia to study at the Moscow Linguistic University in Irkutsk. I think that's it.
I'm so sorry. I have no idea.
Not easy. I listened to this multiple times before hitting record and hopping on this call.
But
it is what it is.
That literally, that's the same exact timeline as me. Did it say he graduated the University of Missouri, or did he just have this ambition to go in his graduation year to Moscow?
Actually, I'm not entirely sure. I didn't see an official graduation record,
but likely
I wouldn't be surprised because the timing lines up. 2019 to 2013. That's 4 years.
Yep, that's the same exact as me. So I imagine
it's certainly possible.
Yeah, I imagine he graduated and when this was sort of like a grad school-y kind of thing. I don't know the story.
That's kind of what I'm thinking.
You guys, I'm with you.
I couldn't see if he was doing like a bachelor's or a grad program, master's.
But for whatever reason,
that wasn't terribly clear.
For whatever reason, he ends up at the Linguistic University, which is pretty cool. He must have been really good at Russian.
Yes. And he also really loved to travel. It sounds like he really valued being able to immerse himself into other cultures so that he could learn them to appreciate them. And I think that's something that you and I both can very much understand. We both love doing that same thing.
I agree. Yeah, that's something that if you have the time and ability to go for a little longer than a week, I always recommend it, highly recommend it. I really enjoy it. Just, being in another country and then all of a sudden you need Pepto-Bismol and you got to go figure it out. Like, welcome to a new country. Figure out how to get Pepto in a new language. And that just stimulates the happy chemical in my brain.
Yeah, one thing I always recommend to people if they ask me about travel experiences and what they should do if they're going anywhere, I always say, try to find something that is a local thing to do.
Yes.
So whether you're finding that local cafe or local festival or events or something, try to immerse yourself in their culture by doing what somebody who lives there every single day would do.
Yeah, I agree. And we've talked before about your background in London, and I'm not sure if we've said it on air, but Sam gave me what I think was some great travel advice. The Mad Artisan husband and I are going to London. There's family there. And Sam's advice was to pick a random tube subway stop and just go out and explore what's there. And I think that is awesome advice for everybody.
That's what I did every Friday and Saturday when I was there in college. Because I'm not much of a drinker. I don't like to go out and get hammered. And
Right.
a lot of the other students in my program would go into these clubs that had like entry fees and stuff. I'm like, I'd rather spend my money going to a street vendor
Absolutely.
and like doing something that is not inside a club that I can do in Chicago if I chose to stay home.
Totally. And I honestly, too, I recommend this domestically as well. Like, not even just international travel. Like, anywhere you go, just try and find the local haunt, you know? And
like, obviously be smart and like,
right. And respectful.
Like, where you're going, know that there are risks and look it up ahead of time.
Right. But, be smart, be respectful of
do what
the
you need to do to
locals.
protect yourself.
Yeah. And I find if you respect the locals and respect the area, you don't typically have a problem. Just, you know.
Absolutely.
Always watch around. You know, keep an eye out. But I think it's great advice that you gave.
Well, thank you. I definitely recommend it to anybody. But Colin really loved living in Russia. And by the time he moved there, he was fully fluent in Russian and Spanish.
Wow.
And obviously, in addition to his native language of English, he was also in the process of learning Icelandic and Japanese.
Wow.
Yeah. And this reminds me of Hella Crafts, one of our really early episodes. She had this incredible ability to learn languages. And I wish I had that talent. But I just don't.
I wish. I have known a couple people who have the gift of the gab, and they can pick up those languages. One of my very closest friends who I first lived with when I moved here to the city is fluent in Spanish and obviously his native English. And he Duolingos like every language. Like he's busy learning Russian. And I am still on my Duolingo with Spanish, struggling with the grammar. So I am so impressed by people who can do that. And Icelandic.
See, I spent time in Italy where I knew it. I knew Italian quite well. It's all gone.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to France because I had studied for 5 years in school on it, and it's all gone. But also, like, learning Japanese, that is ambitious.
It's very difficult. And Icelandic. I believe that's also an incredibly difficult language to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. And Russian alone, that he was fluent in Russian. Like, that must have been incredibly difficult to learn.
Yeah. So it's obviously Colin is incredibly smart, and he had accomplished so much at really such a young age.
Yeah.
And his career goal was to work in the United Nations or be a diplomat in Russia, an American diplomat.
Oh, okay.
And to me, it seems like he was truly on his way to this. He clearly, obviously, he knew the languages. He was studying and was able to immerse himself to be in the area where he could make that happen for his own life.
Yeah, absolutely. He was integrating himself into the culture so he could better help, you know, as a diplomat. That's admirable. And you're right. It sounds like he was on track to do all of that, which makes me very nervous.
Yeah. So in March of 2016, Colin and a couple of his friends decided to visit the town of Arshan in eastern Siberia. And this is pretty far south in Siberia. It's fairly close to the Mongolian border.
Okay.
And Arshan is about 200 kilometers or 125 miles from where he was studying for school.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a trip, but not like super far away.
Yeah.
And him and all of his friends were staying at this cabin, which was pretty remote, a little bit outside of town. So it's not like they were in this like populated downtown area.
Right.
But very much in this kind of solitary cabin.
Okay.
And this cabin was very, very simple. It basically was just a big room with a handful of beds.
Okay.
It didn't have running water. It didn't have a bathroom inside of it. Instead, it had an outhouse.
Oh, no.
So you can imagine you're in Siberia.
Oh,
You don't want to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom.
No, no, ma'am.
And then on March 27th, him and his friends, they decided that they were going to go hike the Zion Mountains.
Okay.
And this sounds like it was a pretty intense hike.
Mm-hmm.
And him and his 3 friends intended on waking up at 5 a.m. that morning so that they can be outside beginning their hike by 7 a.m.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So remember, Siberia in March.
Oof,
And
it's
despite
March,
it
yeah.
being late spring, it's actually not as harsh as you'd kind of expect it to be.
Uh-huh.
There was definitely still snow on the ground, but overall the temperatures kind of hovered around 50 degrees during the day.
Okay, so moderate.
Yeah, it can be comparable to Chicago on occasion.
Yeah.
Like it's further north, technically, than where Chicago lines up.
Yeah.
But it's kind of in southern Canada is kind of where that lines up across the world.
Right. And I see why you're never going to catch me waking up at 5 a.m. to go on a hike. But if you want to go on an intense hike, I imagine you definitely want to get started by 7 a.m. That way you're not just baking in the sun. Because, like, even though it's Siberia in March, the sun might be out and it might be blasting you.
Oh, yeah. And if anyone has ever been outside on a really sunny, snowy day, it is so easy to get severely sunburnt.
Yeah, it's so
because
bright.
This actually happened to a friend of mine as we were just talking about studying abroad. One of my friends went to the Swiss Alps for his spring break, and he went hiking, and he got so sunburnt underneath his chin because the sun hit the snow and reflected up.
Oh,
so it was a spot you don't necessarily think of to completely lather and sunblock.
Right.
I felt so bad for him.
Oh no.
He couldn't shave.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I felt so bad for him. So you have to be very careful. So yeah, you're right. Going out early in the morning is easier, better, especially when you're on a long hike. You don't want to be getting home late after dark. You'd prefer to be getting home around sunset or late afternoon.
Yeah.
And so the group of friends the night before were just hanging out, and they ended up going to bed around 2 a.m., which to me feels very late if you're waking up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
But they're college kids.
Okay, yeah, yeah, exactly. They're in college. Maybe 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. was just enough time for them, but once again, you're not going to catch me there. Oh, no.
I just can't imagine going on a really intense hike after 3 hours of sleep. But
no.
They're college kids. They can bounce back.
Yeah, they bounce.
A whole lot better than I can in my 30s.
Yeah, exactly. They bounce right back.
So at some point before 5 a.m., Colin left the cabin alone.
Okay.
So we have basically a 3-hour window where at some point within that window of time, he left alone.
Okay. Oh, no.
And according to a police report and a Siberian Times article that was published on March 29th, Colin was wearing sand-colored trousers, which were basically cargo pants.
Sure.
A t-shirt, and wore gray hiking boots.
Okay.
So at this point, March 29th, 2 days after Colin left the cabin, he was missing.
Yeah.
The 3 friends woke up on the 27th, again, 3 hours, and they just had no idea where he went.
Oh, no. And the description from the Siberian Times does not describe him as wearing a coat.
Nope.
No. But
so as I kind of mentioned, there's still snow on the ground. It wasn't terribly cold. But
still.
Siberian Times kind of said it was about 9 degrees Celsius on average, which is 48 degrees Fahrenheit. But it does have the potential of dropping down below freezing overnight. But I don't, unfortunately, have the average temperature at night. But you can kind of guess it could easily hover at freezing or go a little bit below.
Yeah. Especially this time of year. This March.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's backtrack a little bit. Colin disappears on the 27th.
Right.
His friends woke up at 5 a.m. as planned, not knowing where he was. But they noticed that he had left stuff behind, including his backpack, his hiking gear. And so their immediate thought was just that he went outside to go use the outhouse. But then the longer he was gone, obviously the less likely that seemed. They figured they'd just wait a couple of hours to see if Colin would come back in time for the planned hike. But by 7 a.m., still hadn't returned. And now his 3 friends were getting very worried.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of going on their hike, they went in town to see if they could find him there.
Okay. 7 a.m. We're going to town. So, okay. It makes sense. Their thought process, because they're in this remote cabin. Like, maybe he walked to the closest place where he could find whatever is in town, and hopefully they would find him there.
Yeah.
But you would also hope that maybe they would
I can only imagine waking up and not knowing.
Right. You would also maybe think that by 7, after waiting a couple hours, they may have called the cops. I would have thought maybe.
I'm not entirely sure they had phones.
Yes, that was
They might have.
They might not have had signal.
I never saw a report.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that was another reason they were going into town. Like we can get signal there, and we can. Yeah.
And I know when I was abroad, I was gone for 5-6 months. I didn't have a phone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was 2011, so this was a handful of years before.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have a cell phone when I was abroad. It just, to me, it didn't seem worth it. It seemed kind of like a waste of money.
Right. Well, yeah. It barely works.
Yeah, and like the people I was with, I was in a really unique study program. So the people I was with, I was constantly with. So they're the only people I'd be talking to anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So,
mm-hmm.
But yeah, they might have had the phone. They might not have had a phone. I honestly don't know.
It would make sense if it's just a remote, like, box cabin. It would make sense if they had no cell signal.
Yeah, even if they did have a phone.
Right.
We have no idea.
Right.
But Colin, he was a very experienced hiker.
Mm-hmm.
He would often take trips to Siberia, hiking in different locations.
Oh, wow.
He also volunteered at one point to build hiking trails. So this was definitely a passion of his.
So he's I was going to say he's very knowledgeable in this area.
Mm-hmm. He's actually done this hike before.
Okay.
This hike it's called the Peak of Love.
Mm-hmm.
And his mom had said that he had done it up to 4 times previously.
Wow. Okay.
And even with all of this experience, I think especially because of all of this experience, his friends didn't believe that he would have gone on this hike alone, especially before 5 a.m.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm not an experienced hiker, but I do know that one of the most important things is you either inform whoever you're leaving behind that you're going and the likely time you'll be back, or you do not go alone.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is a big reason why the friends made the decision to head into town instead of attempting to go on the hike.
Right.
Because they could have gone on the hike and be like, we'll catch up.
Mm-hmm.
But they strongly believed that he would not have done this.
He wouldn't have, yeah.
So they wanted to come up with something else that would hopefully help find him.
Right.
And then also they did want to go to the police. And going in town, they have to go to the police.
Right.
But unfortunately, the local precinct was closed, so they couldn't actually report him missing until that evening.
What? Question mark?
I don't have more details. I really wish I did.
Yeah.
It also makes me think they don't have a phone.
Yeah.
If they can't call in a missing person report. But also, I don't know about Russian law. I don't know if it needs to be done in person. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know enough to know why the local police precinct would be closed. Like, maybe they didn't always have a presence in the area because it was rural, like Sherry and Woundedfoot style?
Well, that's what I was going to say is, like, I know where I grew up. Well, I guess I don't know anymore. They didn't have people there overnight. And I don't know what day of the week this is, but I'm kind of assuming it's a weekend. And maybe they run like office hours.
And it sounds like they're early. Like they headed into town like around like 7, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what
said.
time
So
of day they went
was,
in. I just know that they couldn't report it until evening.
That evening.
So that kind of makes me think they weren't there like late morning, afternoon. But honestly, I don't know.
Right. So that means if they're not able to report him till that evening, then he's been missing now for more than probably 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not good.
Yeah, like 12 to 16 hours probably at this point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So during the initial investigation, authorities questioned Colin's friends, as to be expected. Mm-hmm. But afterward, his friend said that the police were really trying to pressure them to confess to murdering him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's an interesting tack to take when somebody is still just missing.
Oh, just wait.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready.
So, there's a lot more to this.
Yeah.
The Siberian Times initially reported that the first suspects were indeed Colin's friends and that they were being polygraphed. Mm-hmm. And one thing I found interesting is this article very, very specifically pointed out that one of his friends was also an American.
Okay, well.
Like, they didn't go any more in depth into it, but it was like, by the way, one of his friends was an American.
Okay. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if that's a telling detail, but I suppose.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, it kind of felt off, but at the same time,
like maybe they were.
Is it relevant? Is it not relevant?
Maybe they were trying to say they were focusing on him. I don't know.
Yeah.
But also, as of this point in this story, I'm not convinced that Colin's friends had anything to do with this. And it sounds like they are of a different opinion.
Yeah. Authorities tried to get them to admit that an alcohol or drug-fueled fight started and that ended in Colin's death.
What?
All the friends immediately denied this.
Uh-huh.
And it actually turns out none of them actually drank alcohol.
Oh.
Like ever. They just never drank alcohol. They didn't like it. They weren't into it.
Yeah.
So obviously, like, this theory fell through.
Yeah.
Like,
honestly,
there's no legs to stand on if none of them drink.
This sounds a lot like, I don't mean to go on a tangent here, but one of my first jobs in Chicago, I come from a theater background, and I was working on an original play about wrongful conviction. And this, what I'm hearing, sounds a lot like the old police technique, the Reed technique, which is where they question you for hours upon hours upon hours and try to convince you certain things happened that did not happen in order to elicit a confession. And that is all true. That is all factual. Cops were trained that way at one point. I do not believe it's in use anymore. But this, what they're saying happened and they're trying to convince them of, is giving me that vibe. That they're just trying to elicit a confession.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there was one thing that investigators were able to determine, and it sounds like the friends were very honest and upfront about this, but they all smoked joints that were weed and tobacco and just hanging out in the cabin that night.
Right.
It doesn't sound like it was anything crazy. It was 4 friends hanging out in a remote cabin, smoking a joint.
Right. In the middle of the woods, like, just, yeah. Certainly not something that would cause, like, a fueled fight that would end in death,
Exactly.
Certainly not.
And to me, it sounds like the friends came forward with this information right away. Because they wanted to do anything they could to find their friend.
Exactly. It sounds like they're just trying to help a lot. That's why I said before, I'm just still not convinced they had anything to do with it, because it sounds like they're being very forthcoming and want to help find him.
Exactly. So then a couple days later, on April 1st, Colin's mom, Dana Calcutt, arrives in Russia. And Collins University actually provided Dana with a translator when she arrived.
Oh, that's good.
And almost immediately, police started to voice their new theory.
Okay.
Dana said that an officer insisted that Colin was gay, which is something that is not typically socially acceptable in Russia. And the officer said that Colin took part in a wild orgy, and apparently, somehow, this led to his disappearance.
What?
Yep. Like, I don't know where he's getting this information.
Where? Yeah. Is there a lead investigator on this? Because he should be fired.
I didn't see any specific names for one.
This theory is...
Yeah, like, I don't know where it's coming from.
This theory is crazier than anything I've seen on Reddit. Like, what? An orgy?
To me, it just feels like, okay, here's a scenario.
Yeah.
Whether it's feasible or not. Okay, that one, drinking, I guess that falls through. Not happening.
Right.
Okay, maybe it's this other one. Oh, look at that. Oh, he was smoking some weed. Oh, you know what? This one's gonna stick. He was gay.
Right. Like, what? And then that they're saying there was a wild orgy at the cabin in the woods. Yeah. Like a wild rumpus, when we haven't talked about this yet, and I'm sure you'll get to it, but I'm going to say that I doubt that there's any strong physical evidence that there was a wild orgy at this cabin.
Nope. Like, none of the friends are saying it.
Oh, right.
Like, so, obviously, this really makes Dana angry.
Yeah.
It also makes her translator angry.
Okay.
And her translator actually got in a yelling match with the officer.
Oh, well, hey, good. Sticking up for your client, you know? Because she might not have understood everything, you know, like and she might have not understood the nuances through the translation. So at least the translator is getting in there and being like, yo, man, this is wrong. You are doing the wrong thing right now.
Right. And it shows me, too, that obviously his school valued him to offer a translator.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this was somebody that a lot of people clearly cared about.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't be getting this help. He wouldn't have his 3 friends doing everything they can to support. His mom wouldn't come fly all the way out to Russia and be provided these extra resources by the place he went to school. Like, this is a lot. And
yeah,
it shows to me that he is obviously, well, everyone, but like in the terms of this happened to a good person type of thought concept, like they wanted to give her all the resources because this was a shock to everybody. And so I saw an article that came out in 2019, so a few years after, that said authorities didn't actually conduct a search for the first 2 days. Instead, this was the time when they were questioning and accusing Colin's friends of his disappearance. The search didn't actually begin until Dana arrived.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And that just like blows my mind.
That blows my mind too. That is like the exact opposite of what you should be doing in the first 2 days. And also, again, I know it's a rural area, but don't you have enough officers to be questioning the friends and sending at least maybe 2 guys out there to look around?
You would think, but honestly...
But it could be a
different
rural,
areas function so differently than what we're used to.
Yeah.
That I can't make a judgment on that.
Yeah. And again, the size of the area, we don't know how big their police force was. You know, maybe but we do know that this is not the correct course of action.
And as the days went by, we don't really have much more information that's discovered in that time. At this point, finally, search parties are doing their best to find Colin. And they didn't come up with any results.
Wow.
I heard at one point that Colin's friends pooled their money together to hire a search helicopter. But I don't have a specific source of this, so keep in mind it might not be accurate. But according to what I saw, it was too windy to fly, and so this helicopter never actually took part in the search. But then I did read another article later from the Siberian Times that mentioned that drones were used during his search.
Okay.
But they didn't yield any results. So I don't know if this helicopter thing is accurate or not, because I would think if it's too windy for a helicopter to go up, you probably can't get a drone.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Either way, to me, I still think his friends are doing everything they can. Whether they were able to pool money together for a helicopter or not,
yeah,
they're doing what they can to help.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, they're still there because now it's been quite a few days, probably. And, they haven't.
Yeah, he disappeared on the 27th.
Yeah, they haven't moved on. They're staying there to help, Yeah.
So eventually, 8 days after Colin's disappearance, on April 4th, a search party did find his body off of a hiking trail. It was found 1.5 kilometers from the cabin that they were staying in, which is just less than a mile.
Wow.
Yeah, close.
Wow. I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt you. But less than a mile from the cabin, and he wasn't found? What?
Yeah.
He wasn't found for 8 days?
So there's a couple things that I can understand and I can't understand. It's not easy finding somebody in a rural area. Those searches are very difficult to do, especially when you have a changing climate, such as spring.
You're right about that. Yeah, it is only April 4th at this time.
And so,
there
I understand
snow.
maybe not finding him immediately, but 8 days seems like a lot of days for being a mile away.
Yeah.
But he was found lying on his back at the base of a large tree. And so, as we've mentioned, springtime, 50 degrees, the snow is melting, and as I think most of you know, Siberia gets a lot of snow. So at this point of the season, it's very patchy with the snow. So he was actually found in a grassy area, but a lot of areas around him still had snow.
Okay.
And please know, if you are choosing to Google this case, there's a very good possibility you are going to find photos of when his body was found. They are out there. They are Google image search. It'll be one of the first things you find when you type in his name. Just a word of warning.
Look out for yourself.
It's out there. It's very easy to find. But none of these sources that we're going to link are going to have those photos. I've made sure to go through all of them. But then another article that was published on April 4th did mention that initially the review of his body, it was considered homicide as his manner of death. But it was very quickly changed to death by exposure to the cold. And so, remember, he was found on April 4th. This article came out on April 4th. That's a very quick decision to change and then also be able to fully publish an article that day on it.
Yeah. I don't know how it works in Siberia. I don't know the process in Siberia, but I do know that here in America it can be incredibly difficult to get a medical examiner to change their opinion on the manner of death. And if they do, it takes some time for them to be looking into that before they will change what opinion they form because of their education and they know what they've seen.
And the article, it did clearly say that the death was still being investigated, but I just found that really interesting that it initially had the suspicion of murder, homicide, but then was so quickly changed in that time frame to publish that article.
Yeah.
Just found it interesting to call out.
Yeah.
So the conclusion that the Russian authorities had come to was that Colin's death was from cannabis and hypothermia, and it was ruled an accident.
Come on. I'm so, that's all I have to say. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
So let's get into a few details about how Colin was found.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, he was found in a grassy area, lying at the base of a tree on his back. His left leg was bent at a 90-degree angle under him. So essentially, from his knee, his left leg was sticking straight out to the left. In a very unnatural position. And again, there are photos if you are interested. They are not bloody, but obviously you know what you're looking at. And it could easily be very upsetting. But it's a very awkward position to be in.
Yeah. Because his left leg is bent. When you say the 90-degree angle, it's bent at a 90-degree angle the incorrect way, right? Like, it's not like...
Not necessarily where it's like, it's broken. Like, you can naturally get yourself into that position, I feel like, but it would hurt.
Right. It would not
it would stretch your muscles.
It would not be like a natural fall.
Yeah, and you wouldn't leave your leg in that position.
Yeah.
You might not get injured if you're, quickly... you know what I mean? Where it's it could easily pull muscles. It could break a bone. It could harm you. But there's also the potential that if your leg does bend that way, you could be fine.
Okay. But he is found with it basically jammed there and stuck. Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, I wanted to try to find information on whether the bone was broken or anything, and I couldn't find any of that. We'll talk about it a little later. I did find some autopsy stuff, but it was very minimal. But that was something that I kind of wish I knew.
Yeah.
It won't answer all of the questions I have, but it could bring a little light to what's maybe a little more important.
Yeah.
And as we talked a little bit earlier, Sun-Times reported that, Siberian Times reported that.
Sorry, Sun-Times is the Chicago paper.
Yeah. So the Siberian Times reported that Colin was wearing pants, a shirt, and boots.
Okay.
His pants were tan cargo pants. His shirt was a long sleeve thermal. And his boots were hiking boots. So a couple odd things here still. Obviously, you mentioned earlier he didn't have a coat. But with his boots, he had no socks on, just boots. And the laces were taken out of the boots. I don't have more information. I don't know why. I don't know where the laces were. I don't know if they were in the cabin or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Weird.
Weird.
He was also found with his wallet and everything in it.
Wow.
Cash, cards, gift cards, passport.
Wow. He had everything on him. Interesting.
Yeah, I think, because I'm assuming cargo pants, he probably just had it all in his pockets.
Yeah. Wow.
There was no other sign of human activity, but this was also 8 days after his disappearance. And I don't know exactly what the weather was like in those 8 days. I'm not entirely sure if it rained or if there were large amounts of snow or anything, because that's kind of that time of year where you could get both.
Right. Because like we said, it's spring, so there's a very good chance all of this happened. And in 8 days.
And we know it's 50 during the day on average, so that snow is melting. You know that the ground is going to be very, very wet. And it has the ability to cover up tracks because of that moisture.
Yeah.
So there's no sign of human activity, but we have no way of knowing whether there was or not, unless there was something clear as day, left behind or something. We just don't have that.
Right.
And I didn't see any reports of Colin tracks anywhere
Uh-huh.
in the mile between the cabin and where he was found. And I'm assuming it's because of that it was spring and just
Right.
tracks disappeared.
The weather. Yeah.
But his body was apparently found a little bit off of a hiking trail.
Mm-hmm.
And according to investigators, they told Dana that it was too inaccessible for her to visit,
What?
at least during the investigation. So she never actually got to go to the area where her son was found during this investigation.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I were this mother, I mean, I can't imagine. Like,
Yeah.
the terrible thing that your son dies in a foreign country, and you don't speak the language, and you've got to do everything through a translator, and they are stonewalling you like this from seeing where your child was. Too inaccessible? Come on.
Yeah.
Like, if it was too inaccessible...
Obviously, there's a lot of issues with this investigation, but it doesn't seem like Dana got the respect that she deserves.
And if it was too inaccessible, tell me why they built a cabin a mile away.
Well, okay, I understand the too inaccessible to a small extent. I don't agree that, like, if they were able to go out there and find him with search parties, she probably could have gotten out there herself, like, without an issue. Yeah. But I do understand being in a very rural, snowy, springtime area, because I'm comparing this to where I grew up. There's some areas where I grew up that are not easily accessible, even though logically they should be. Mm-hmm. But, like, if you're needing to get a four-wheeler or a gator or something out there, which a lot of these response teams have to do. I know we've said it multiple times. My sister is a first responder in northern Wisconsin, and she's gone on searches. She's done all this sort of stuff in this sort of general climate. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult. And she's highly trained in being able to navigate these areas because the average person can't do it. And unfortunately, a lot of the searches she goes on are because hikers get stuck or campers get in some sort of weather situation that they can't get out of and they've gone missing. So I do understand it to an extent, but I do feel like there's a good possibility there were ways that they could have helped support her to get out there.
Yeah. But that makes a lot of sense with, like, Ash's experience because, like, where I grew up in Ohio is quite flat. So it's not similar to the sort of intense muddy conditions that would require a four-wheeler. People had them where I grew up, and I've ridden one, but I've never been to an area where it was necessary to travel on a four-wheeler to get through, and it sounds like that might have been the case here.
That's my assumption. Again, I never saw this really clearly defined in articles. I'm just basing this off of my experience with what I grew up and having it be a semi-similar climate at that same time of year. But understandably, from the very, very beginning here, Colin's mom made it very clear that she did not agree with the fact that authorities are saying that Colin froze to death.
Okay, yeah.
In a Siberian Times article, she is quoted, and this article came out on April 7th, so 3 days after he's found. But she says, "A murder investigation is still open, and I hate to think about it. But I believe, barring some medical catastrophe like an aneurysm or pulmonary embolism, that is likely." So she's really pushing that, like, she thinks it's murder unless something basically comes up in an autopsy.
Right. Did they... I'm sure we'll get to it. But, I mean, yeah, they did. They did that investigation where they changed their minds right quick from homicide to hypothermia and cannabis. You would think they would hopefully, properly trained ME would be able to catch something like an aneurysm or a pulmonary embolism. you know,
Mm-hmm.
and if that was present, she probably would have known. So I can kind of see why she is not suspicious, and I definitely see why she doesn't trust the investigators, because they haven't given her a reason to.
Nope. And even in the article, she's quoted further saying, I believe the local police here did not do their job. And even to me, made innuendos and remarks that were defamatory to Colin.
Mm-hmm.
When they didn't know him and they should have been looking for him. I think they're trying to cover up ineptitude that occurred here before we came. And the pressure to find him was accelerated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, exactly what you're saying. She's not holding back here.
Hard agree. Yes, I think that a hard agree. She is 100% say that's what they were doing. They were making defamatory remarks about him when they should have been looking for him. That is the truth right there. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she goes on even further saying, help me if you can get the right information out there. He deserves better than this. Corruption, cover-up abounds here in this place, and I'm so grateful for the Russian FBI and all of its volunteers and Colin's dear, dear friends. And I will say there was a big separation in the local authorities and the Russian FBI.
Mm-hmm.
Because when Dana came in on April 1st, a few days later, that's when the Russian FBI became involved in the case.
Picked it up. Okay, that makes sense.
I'm pretty sure that the searches started because the FBI led that, not local authorities.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
that's
that
my
makes
assumption,
sense.
just based on like some of the wording in articles.
Yeah.
And based on her reaction here, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
That the FBI were the ones who actually did the work here.
Right. They kind of turned it around from where it was, which was nowhere. So.
Mm-hmm. And so, beyond the first interaction, where she was told Colin was gay,
in participating in an orgy.
Yes.
That is, I mean,
she's
defamatory. I'm sorry, go on.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
And there's no evidence to come up with that theory.
Right.
Which is what makes it so, like, mind-blowing that even happened.
That's egregious. They have nothing to... And don't get me wrong, I don't want to yuck anybody's yum. Do whatever you want. But these law enforcement officers have no hard evidence to support that. And they're telling the victim's mother that? Nah.
Yeah. And, whatever. If that was their choice and as a group of friends they wanted to get a remote cabin in Russia and have an orgy, fine.
Go for it. Go for it. But
there's nothing wrong with that choice.
But there would be evidence.
Why make that assumption?
Yeah, and then why communicate it to the victim's mother as though it is fact? Like,
exactly.
That is so egregious.
So it's just stumbling block after stumbling block with her and these local authorities. Mm-hmm. So she had this incredible relief with the Russian FBI behind her. Mm-hmm. So things were still very, very hopeful.
Yeah.
In figuring stuff out.
Right.
And she had this long Facebook post, and she has a few bullet points that she felt were incredibly important to point out within this investigation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this is just kind of pointing out what the local authorities either documented wrong or didn't fully investigate or just don't understand. So the first one being, they reported he went out in a t-shirt. That's not true. He went out in a long sleeve thermal shirt.
I was going to say
it doesn't necessarily sound like a big deal, but the thermal shirt is so much more protective, especially being long sleeve, than a t-shirt.
As soon as you brought it up, when they talked about finding the body in the long sleeve thermal shirt, I thought about that first police interaction where he was reported as being in a t-shirt. And I'm like, yep, even that's wrong.
And that was police documentation saying t-shirt.
Yeah, wrong.
Yeah, there was no substantiation or proof that he went outside for a walk. Yes, the bathrooms are outside, but it wasn't like, I'm going to go out on my own for an hour. See y'all later. Like, nothing to like prove that he made the decision to leave his friends. And then if Colin did any drugs that night, and that's something that we don't have 100% proven, we just have the conversation from the friends, it would have only been marijuana. And if he was smoking marijuana that night, it would have been hours before his disappearance.
Correct.
And confidently, no alcohol was involved.
Yeah.
Then the next one is that night, she's saying that it was not sub-zero temperatures. Again, I don't have the exact temperature, but I would kind of assume if it's 50 during the day, you're probably hovering close to sub-zero. But again, we don't really know.
Yeah.
But she's saying that it would have been, I'm going to say quote unquote warm. But she continues saying, if anyone knows Colin, he had an incredible tolerance to cold weather.
Well,
so
and he'd made
if you're running out to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you like, if you have a tolerance to cold weather, you might not put on your coat. Is kind of what I'm thinking.
Right. And also, you might not put your socks on your boots because you're just running to the bathroom.
Yeah, you were in bed. You're not wearing your socks in bed. You just slip them on because you have to go pee and run back inside.
Right.
So, like, those obviously are all important. But she continues saying that, like, he loved this place. He loved to hike here. He spoke fluent Russian. And he was prepared for this hike, but everything he prepared was left in the cabin.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important piece of this.
Yeah.
And he was found a mile away, which was one day after the Russian FBI came into the investigation. So I guess they didn't necessarily come in the day that she came to Russia. They came in 2 or 3 days after. But still.
Significant that he was found as soon as the Russian FBI became involved.
And when he was found, he wasn't huddled or covered in leaves, but he was fully flat on his back in the grass. His sleeves were pushed up, and his boots were unlaced, no socks. His eyes and his mouth were open, and he was not in the snow. It was just on the grass. And she said that one of the rescuers took a picture and sold it to the Russian tabloid.
No.
So also know, if you are searching this case, that picture that you do see is not something that she wanted out there.
No, that makes me...
That's awful.
That makes me... And the shitty thing is that I have heard of this happening before, and I think it is the most disgusting, disrespectful thing you can do to the victim and to their family. Because now for the rest of her life, she has to worry about, if she goes on the internet, she might see that picture.
And like I said, you do one very basic search of this case, and it's the first thing you see. So, like, you're affecting her, you're affecting the rest of his family and his friends, but also to the people who are wanting to learn about this case, it's almost inevitable that you're going to see it. But she has 2 more things that she has on her list here, saying that he wasn't suicidal, and he was very, very excited about his future, wanting to work in the UN. And that finally, he just really loved his friends and his family.
Yeah.
So to her, these are all immediate reasons why she thinks that this wasn't his own doing.
Yeah. Because I don't want to say, I don't pretend to know everyone's situation, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush here. at all, because suicidal thoughts present in many different ways. But from everything we've covered here, there doesn't believe to be, or I don't believe there to be any significant evidence of this being his own doing or being some sort of suicidal ideation that he carried out. It just doesn't follow.
Yeah.
It doesn't follow.
Yeah, suicide, I just feel like it was never really discussed in the beginning as a theory because it really doesn't make sense. And obviously there were theories that make zero sense, but no one felt like this was even one that could be like used as an excuse of why he's no longer alive. Right.
Like, it sounds like they didn't even work that theory.
Mm-hmm. But let's get back to Colin's body and his injuries again.
Yeah.
And one thing that I will say that seems pretty good is that his body was returned to the States fairly quickly.
That is good.
That is not something that happens all the time. It is a very difficult process.
No, ma'am. It is very difficult. It is very difficult.
And one thing that happened when the funeral home was preparing his body, first off, I'm chalking this up to terrible miscommunication, but who knows what it could be. But he was returned in a coffin in a suit that apparently was provided by the Russian government. Okay. That was never told to Dana. So she went out and bought a new coffin and a suit. And if any of you know how much coffins are, they're a lot of money. Yeah. So she basically was given one for free and still ended up buying one because she was never told.
Right.
So that just seems like a good thing that, yes, he was provided this for free. But
why?
Now she's having to deal with.
But why?
Now having to either figure out how to return a coffin or
right. And that just seems strange to me. Why? Like, why was he fully dressed as well? Like, what?
Yeah. And the funeral home did change his clothes into what she bought for him.
Okay, good.
So they did undress him and they noticed some bruising. So Colin's family immediately wanted to have a specialist in the States review his injuries.
Yes.
And during this preliminary report, the pathologist determined that this is a suspicious death of an American in a foreign country that warrants further investigation.
Wow.
That is a direct quote from that pathologist.
Wow. Okay.
Unfortunately, there were some conflicts with this pathologist. I don't know exactly what these conflicts are. I saw some rumors, but they're not substantiated, so I don't want to bring more drama into it. Yeah. But whatever these conflicts are, it prevented this pathologist from looking into this any further.
Wow.
So this unfortunately left Colin's family in a really difficult position because I can't imagine finding a new pathologist that quickly is an easy thing. It's definitely not going to be cheap.
No, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Exactly. And like you would hopefully in this sort of case, like obviously she's already spending a lot of money. We just talked about the coffin. You would hope that somebody would kind of do this pro bono and or something, like have some sort of financial backing from a foundation that's willing to help or something. And that all takes time and none of it's easy to organize. And not knowing where to start, this unfortunately put the investigation of Colin's body into kind of this standstill where they had to make a decision.
Right.
Where they were basically running out of time and they just had to bury him.
Oh my God, that feels so bad for his family right now.
And obviously, like, this is none of their fault. They're not only grieving, but they're trying to navigate this international case all at the same time.
That's awful.
One thing that did happen before Colin was buried was a toxicology report.
Okay.
And while a toxicology report was done in Russia and it tested positive for cannabis, the American report tested negative for all drugs, including cannabis. So this kind of raises a couple red flags to me. I'm not sure if it is for you, But his friends admitted to smoking the night before, saying that he took part in this. So his test, in my opinion, should likely be positive.
Right.
But the American test is coming back saying negative for all drugs.
Yeah. What I am wondering and don't have the answer for is, the thing is, how long do you continue to test positive for cannabis? Because at this point, his body,
I don't know.
It's been so long. And I know that eventually, at some point, to detect cannabis, you have to do a hair test. Because it will
Well, that's what I was about to say, is like they
will
could have done it through his hair, but they could have done it through his blood. I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't know how long it stays in your system. And if you're dead, if it does stay there, as is, that might make sense. I don't know. But you're right. That raises questions for me as well.
Well, what raises questions with me, too, is these other conflicts that happened with this pathologist in combination with the negative results, kind of a red flag, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Again, I don't really know any facts in this. I don't know if it had anything to do with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But no.
Yeah, but strange. Odd. Yeah.
A group called Independent Forensic Services did review this case, and they couldn't actually review his body, but they did review the case files and the photos of his body, and in their report they found evidence that leads them to believe that Colin was abused and that he died during the process of this abuse. I don't see this. Unfortunately, this is a thing that was very difficult with this case, and I've said this a lot in this episode. There's all these little snippets of things like this. I have no more information.
Right, because I wonder how they came to the conclusion that he was abused, and like what the bruising was like that they observed.
We have a little bit, and I'll talk about that in just a minute here.
Okay.
But one thing they also called out during their review is that they believe Colin died in a different area than where his body was found. Mm-hmm. And they pointed out the odd position that his body was found in, specifically his leg. Mm-hmm. And they also said that there was a lack of severe decomposition. And that there were a lack of insects on his body, and that's evidence that he was dumped after his death. So, all interesting things to call out. But then in 2019, a couple years later, another pathologist looked over the documents, and they believed that Colin was strangled or smothered. So I don't know if that's what these previous ones also called out, because they just said that they believe he was abused, and in the process of the abuse he died.
Right.
I don't know if they were specifically referring to potential strangulation or smothering.
Yeah.
But maybe.
But perhaps, yeah. Perhaps. Because, they didn't give us much more than he died in the process of abuse. So
exactly,
it could have been that. Yeah, I mean, it could have been.
So, I sent all of these photos of Colin's body and the documents I found to my friend who is a medical examiner. And if you haven't listened to us before, just need a reminder, my friend's a medical examiner in northern Wisconsin. She is absolutely no stranger to hypothermia cases. And when I showed her everything, her immediate response, she said that the way that Colin's leg was bent was giving her second thoughts about the death being ruled as cold exposure. And that she feels like there's a very good likelihood that hypothermia is a secondary cause of death. And I find this very, very interesting because there were a couple photos that showed Colin's foot and his neck. So I had the picture that we mentioned earlier that was sold to the tabloid, where it's kind of a wider picture. It shows his whole body and the tree and some of the foliage around it and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were close-up photos of his foot and his neck.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say the bruising on his neck does look like it has the potential to be strangulation marks.
Okay.
But it's really difficult to tell the full extent of it because it's also very clear that there's a cold exposure.
Yeah. At least, though, with this photo, we now know that it's not just random bruising. It is bruising that is on his neck.
Yes. It is very clearly, like, dark bruising on his neck. But the photo of his foot, it kind of looks pretty similar in the bruising.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that my friend pointed out was that, yes, it looks like it's bruised here, but a lot of what we're seeing was actually frostbite. So I don't know when it comes to his neck, if it was frostbite or not.
Right.
Because that's kind of an odd space to get frostbite. Usually it's in your fingers and your feet and like your extremities first. Because frostbite can very much look like bruising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I found that to be very interesting. That she's like very, very specifically pointed out, like on the foot, I don't think that's bruising. I think that's just cold exposure. Mm-hmm. And that's a big reason why she believes that cold exposure is a factor in his death.
Mm-hmm. Right. Not necessarily maybe the cause, but a factor.
Yeah, well, you can have a secondary factor of death. So, like I'll get into it. She gives me a great kind of idea.
Yeah.
But she also reminded me that bruising just really takes time. And it's very possible that he had some of the bruising a bit before his death, which could potentially be very unrelated. Or it could be, yes, somebody was abusing him. They left him to die outside. And obviously he's not going to immediately die. Like he was strangled to unconsciousness versus strangled to death.
Right.
And the cold killed him after the fact. And those bruises still show up on his neck. Like, that's very possible. Mm-hmm. And then I told her about all the different theories the police are talking about. Mm-hmm. First being drunk, then being high, then the sex orgy theory. Mm-hmm. And she gave me a scenario that kind of does explain everything. And I will tell you, this is something that she just was like, came up with the top of her head, where it's like, oh, well, you know what? This could fit too. Mm-hmm. So she has no evidence of this. It's just based on our basic conversation up to this point. Mm-hmm. But what she said was Colin's friends admitted they were smoking weed that night before his disappearance. Mm-hmm. So let's say he did need to go out and use the outhouse. Mm-hmm. Hence his what he was wearing, his outfit. What if he had a bad reaction to the weed and got incredibly paranoid? He convinces himself that he can't go back into that house for some reason or another due to this paranoia, which is possible. Weed has that potential to do that to you.
It can. Yes. Yes.
So what if he started to walk away from the house or feel like he needed to distance himself? Mm-hmm. And then when I brought up the leg and how it was found in that unnatural position, her response is like, well, if you tried to climb a tree? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That could easily explain his leg, and he could have hit his head, and who really knows? And
you said it wasn't just a tree he was found under, but a large tree. So maybe he was
It was a large tree, and that's one thing that kind of, to me, discredits the theory a little bit, because it would have been a very difficult tree to climb.
Yeah, but
it was a very tall tree with a really wide trunk.
Well, that could explain the fall, though, because he tried to climb it and then did not succeed. I
just don't know how high he could have gotten.
I think that also, though, this theory does explain how he was found so close to the cabin.
Exactly. So, and what's kind of like crazy about this theory is like, we're talking about this the whole time as if this is murder, because what the police are saying does not line up. It does not make sense.
Right.
But this is a purely accidental theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like, we just don't know what happened.
Right.
We have no idea.
Yeah. But could that have happened? Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I don't know how often Colin smoked weed. If he didn't drink alcohol, maybe he normally didn't smoke weed either. So maybe, maybe it freaked him out, like it's possible.
And she also did go on further to say that previous pathologist that mentioned the decomposition and the maggots, she said that both of those things are basically irrelevant. It is not at all alarming that after 8 days he was not found further decomposed with maggots because of the average air temperature.
Yeah.
Maggots are not out that time of year, really. They're still basically in cocoon hibernation mode.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the cold, it's also slowing down decomposition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So her immediate response was like, I don't think, like, while I do think something else happened here, we don't know what it is. I do think the cold was a big part of his death.
Mm-hmm.
But these kind of weird anomalies that some of these pathologists are pointing out are not really weird anomalies. And I trust her. This is what she does a lot of her job as a medical examiner in northern Wisconsin. Has to do with people found outside.
Hypothermia. And hypothermia. Yeah. And
like I won't get into any details, partially because I don't really know them. She's not legally allowed to tell me, but like I called her about this case, and she's like, "Yeah, I was just on a call with people who died due to hypothermia out in the middle of the woods,
right? Hiking,
like
it's just like this. Yeah, you go out hiking and." hiking can be dangerous if you don't prepare properly for it.
Exactly. So, really, as we're saying all this, though, this paranoid falling out of the tree theory is based off of very little information. And I'm not sure if we can really fully classify it as a theory due to that lack of information, because it was just an idea that she brought up given a couple of facts. Mm-hmm. She's unable to actually make any sort of conclusions off of the information I provided her. But I think that there's something to this general idea that, this really could have been just purely accidental.
Maybe, yeah.
And we did talk a lot about how cold it needs to be to become hypothermic. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, it's pretty warm. What was very convenient for me in this conversation is she actually, like less than a week previously to us talking about this, took a class specifically about hypothermia.
Oh, okay.
And so she actually texted me all of her notes.
Oh, perfect. She's great.
It's very handy.
We love her. She's great.
It's very possible to die of hypothermia in 50-degree weather. Mm. Wow. Your body goes through multiple stages of hypothermia, and there are also even different types of hypothermia, which I found really interesting.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to get into all of it because honestly, I could make like a whole nother episode because it's very interesting.
Right.
But your body temp, once it reaches as low as 80 to 78 degrees, which obviously that's almost 20 degrees lower than what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That's typically at the point where you start to lose consciousness and you are very likely to die from it.
Okay.
And so think about it. Like, if you're outside in 50-degree weather for a long enough period of time, it's going to constantly lower your body temperature. So you do have that ability to die in that weather.
Right. Wow. I didn't think of that at all. That...
Like, I would say it probably takes a much longer period of time to have, like, consistent 50-degree weather. But again, this is during the day. Like,
right. We don't know how cold it was that night. Like, it could have gone even faster,
Well, and also think about it. If you're lying on the ground, you're going to be colder because you have a surface that is colder than the air temperature typically.
Right.
And it's probably wet. And so that's going to speed it up.
Mhm.
Even though it's 50 degrees,
Yeah.
it's really colder for
Mhm.
you in that sort of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even this thing called, what'd she call it? It was just, I found it interesting. It was something having to do with like specific water hypothermia
Mm-hmm.
and how much more intense that could be because of that reason. It is this surrounding your body in a different way than just an air temperature.
Uh-huh.
So, as I mentioned earlier, Colin's mother arrived in Russia, questioned by police. She was told, not actually questioned, saying that Colin was gay. So I wanted to look into Russians' laws in relation to any sort of gay rights at all.
Mm-hmm.
And technically, it's not illegal to be in a relationship with somebody who is the same sex in Russia. But you do not have any of the same spousal privileges at a heterosexual couple once married.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, it doesn't seem like any sort of same-sex marriages offer any spousal privileges at all.
So is it legal to get married, or is it just not illegal
I
to
believe
be in
so.
a relationship?
It just doesn't give you anything.
Okay, all right. Well, that's discrimination.
It's a piece of paper and that's it.
Yeah. Well, that's discrimination, Russia. Just FYI.
Well, just wait. There are no laws to prevent hate crime against someone based on their sexual orientation. Yeah.
Whoa.
And unfortunately, over recent years, hate crimes against the queer community have greatly increased in Russia. And as we immediately saw in this case, the police don't provide any protection for anyone who is part of the queer community.
Wow.
And they're willing to use somebody's sexual identity as their excuse in their death. And we obviously immediately saw that the moment Dana arrived in Russia.
Exactly. Yeah. Like they went right to it. When again,
and obviously this is a sweeping statement. Like
right. Just again, there's nothing tying. There's no physical evidence. There's no reason for them to go immediately there, but they did, which is odd.
Exactly. But in our next theory, this is taken a little bit further here.
Mm-hmm.
It is believed that the Russian authorities may have even taken, quote unquote, justice into their own hands. Some people believe that the police, potentially alongside some local citizens, killed Colin themselves due to his presumed sexual orientation.
I don't know if I buy that.
Well, this is hard for me to believe. And it's not because I don't think it's not a valid theory. Unfortunately, it is. It's discussed a lot. I just think it's so hard for me to wrap my brain around it because I just can't imagine feeling so strongly about someone's sexual identity and sexual orientation that it's worth killing them. I can't wrap my head around that.
And I can't either.
But I will tell you,
I think that's because we're good
so
people.
many sources talked about this.
Right. I can't wrap my head around it either, and I think that's because we're good people. And I
hope so.
I do understand that this is a prevalent crime and I do understand that this does happen. However, the reason I say here and said very quickly that I don't buy it is that it took them so long to get the police coordinated and all together, even to look for him. And then we would have had to get a band of police officers together who had seen him, and then a band of local citizens together who somehow had seen him, and then get all of them to this remote cabin, convince all of them that he's gay, and then do it. That just seems like a lot. That's why I don't know that I buy that.
Well, I agree. It's really hard to justify any of that happening.
Yeah.
But think about, okay, if they're in town, they're on their way to this cabin, they stop at a gas station or something, and one or two people see him and make a decision amongst themselves, and it's only a couple people involved. But then, and like one of them's a cop, for instance. Like this is 100% like off the top of my head. None of this is fact or anything. But just imagine they stop at a gas station, cop sees him, makes this assumption based off of nothing, and does this. And then when his friends report him missing, the cop kind of is like, "Oh, it's fine. We don't need to do anything.
Yeah, we don't need to look. It's probably just he was
and like
gay.
obviously there's no proof to this either. It's almost as like blaming them for this is almost as like, well, he's gay. Exactly. Like we have no evidence of this. It's just something that's discussed a lot. So I think it's worth bringing up here because if you read an article that's not from Russia, basically, they talk about this.
Okay. Yeah.
And we discussed this general idea a little bit in Valya's case back in episode 11, which also took place in Russia. But the culture is just very different than anything I've experienced. I know it's anything different than you've experienced, Kelly.
Yes.
And that's why it's so hard for me to wrap my head around this. Similarly, how it's hard for me to wrap my head around trash streaming, which was a huge part in that case.
Yeah, in Valya's case.
Yeah, it's just I can't imagine disapproving of someone's chosen sexual identity or sexual orientation enough to the point where it's okay to kill them off of the assumption. Like, kill them in general, but kill them off of the assumption is a whole nother thing, in my own opinion.
Yeah. That and like you said, I certainly don't have the exposure to the culture or the knowledge or the understanding of how it works over there with day-to-day rights for members of the community, but it's really hard for me to wrap my head around that they'd be like, okay, well, we all assume this, so let's go do this thing that, like, if we get caught, we could be put in jail forever.
Yeah. And
that's
like we have our own issues in our country. I'm not going to get into them because trust me, you don't want me to, because
it's another podcast.
Yeah, that's not what this one is about. But unfortunately, it is very dangerous to be in a same-sex relationship in Russia.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Like it's actually dangerous despite being legal.
Wow.
So when researching this case and the theory that the police killed him just because he was gay, it really blew my mind how often I read this.
Wow. That's,
So it unfortunately tells me it's not necessarily unexpected behavior. So I can't 100% rule it out because of that. But I know if this news came out in America that the police killed somebody due to their sexual orientation, there would be massive backlash.
The rioting that would occur.
Yeah.
This is hard for me to hear because, like, again, I like I just said, I have no knowledge of the culture in Russia, but it's hard to hear and makes me very sad that it is very dangerous to even be in the relationship with the person you love. That makes me that affects me a lot. Like that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I fully agree with you.
But it sounds just, based on your research and it coming up again, it sounds like you're right. Like it's not unexpected. It just affects me and makes me a little angry and sad.
Well, and Colin's mom said that he had a girlfriend back in Missouri.
Oh,
so
like his poor girlfriend.
It's none of our business whether Colin was gay or not. It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. But the fact that they're just flat out wrong.
Right.
If this is all true, and this is what happened, that is just even more heart-wrenching that it is
Yeah.
truly just based off an assumption.
Yeah.
And that is just, that's wrong on a whole nother level,
Yeah.
which is even hard to think about.
Yeah. Wow.
So Colin's mom has been fighting to get this case reopened.
Mhm.
She is not ready to
Yeah.
call it closed.
Yeah.
She still believes that homicide was involved, and I don't blame her for believing that. I'm on the fence. I honestly, I don't know. But there was actually a short period of time that this case was reopened, and it's a little interesting. So in November of 2018, it was reopened, but then it was closed again in February of 2019. So literally a couple months.
Huh.
Apparently, the only thing that was done while this case was being reopened was translating documents. There was no real investigation, and Dana is still fighting for that information.
So
And
they were translating documents from like the original Russian into English, or they were
honestly, I don't know. It just
doing-
said translating documents.
which in itself is enough for me to say, what? Like, you reopened a case to translate documents and then closed it after it? That doesn't...
Well, I wonder if there's different terms of what reopening means.
Yeah, you're
in
right.
Russia?
You're right. There could be.
I think maybe evaluating and organizing considered more so with the translations versus actually reopening and investigating.
Right. So she still is, yeah, she still has not gotten the true reinvestigation of this that it warrants.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, really, in this conclusion here, could have been an accident. It's possible. It could have been foul play. Like, we just don't know. And as my friend, the medical examiner, mentioned, I don't think it's possible. I do think it's possible that Colin could have smoked weed, become paranoid, unfortunately wandered off, and died in the cold. So in reality, the report from Russia could be correct. But at the same time, I'm so stuck with this case because there were so many rush assumptions and lack of investigation that I can't confidently say, yes, that's what happened, even though I do think there's a decent possibility. The report is right. It's marijuana and hypothermia. But, like, we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm of the mind where I understand why his mom wants to get this reopened. But I am not positive that there was foul play here. Like, I understand that she really wants more than anything, probably just a conclusion, probably just some kind of closure, because there's so many threads that could have happened, and she just wants to know what did happen. And it sounds like she's convinced...
And, like, the marks in his neck are weird. Like, there's things that are very unexplained still.
Right. It sounds like she's very stuck on this being homicide, but between speaking with her friend, the medical examiner, and Colin's background as having hiked this area before and been an avid outdoorsman, I honestly am of the mind, I don't know if smoking weed had anything to do with it. I think it's possible. I think
that's just the only thing I can think of why he didn't go back in the house. I do think either situation he went to the bathroom in the middle of the night.
Yeah. And I'm of the mind that this was an accident. And the reason I am of that mind is the way the body was found. Like, with his leg tucked under like that and flat on his back. Like, I think this could have been an accident. Like, and his mother even mentioned, like, I would just like to know, was it a pulmonary embolism? Was it like, there's every chance that he went out to use the bathroom, thought he'd stretch his legs for a minute and then all of a sudden just had a stroke. We don't know because it sounds like the autopsy was just nothing. It sounds like there was hardly an autopsy done, which is what sucks and what makes everything kind of an unknown. You know?
Well, that's why I'm so interested about like the actual injury with the leg too.
Yeah.
Because let's say that marijuana wasn't a factor at all, which you're right. That's totally possible. It's just, it's hard for me to come up with another reason why he didn't go inside. But let's say he just flat out couldn't sleep and just was going to take a quick, like, kind of circle walk around the property. A mile is a bit far for that, I think, at that time of night. But as an avid hiker, it might not be.
And someone tolerant to the cold.
He didn't have a flashlight or anything with him, and he tripped and really hurt his leg. What if he broke his leg in that moment and he couldn't get himself up to get the mile back to the cabin for help? Like, and that could be possible.
And when he
fell... if we don't know, if it was nothing and it was like a very slight muscle pull, that theory doesn't hold up as much.
Right. And like when if this happened, if he did fall, like, did he hit his head and make it even that much more difficult to get a mile back to the cabin? Or did he wander around there to stretch his legs? And even though he was an experienced hiker and knew the area, could he potentially have gotten lost? It's dark. You're right. He didn't have a flashlight. Like, stuff starts to look the same, you know? I
also wonder if, like, the outhouse was the outhouse in between where he was found and the cabin? Exactly. What if he took a wrong turn trying to find the outhouse?
Yeah, I'm interested in that as well. Like, where in relation to the cabin was this outhouse? But I
don't think it was terribly far, but it obviously it's not. It's outside the house. Like you're still having to leave everybody that you're with to go out there.
It's so tough because, like, there are tons of things that could have happened, and, like, it's like, I don't want to say, like, this absolutely didn't happen, because we just aren't sure, but I am inclined to think that this was an accident.
Unfortunately, me too. I just, that seems like Occam's razor. It makes the most sense. The pieces fit together the easiest.
And unfortunately,
and it's like not being overthought as much.
Not to go off on a tangent, but I did read a book, and it was called The Adventurer's Son, and I believe it is by a reporter whose name is, I believe, Roman Dial. I may be wrong. Y'all can correct me. However, he and his son were both very extreme backpackers, hikers, travelers. They always traveled in different areas. They were very experienced. And literally, his son disappeared in the jungle, and it was very much like this. But it took them so long because the area was just so vegetated, like, to search for him. And it was sort of the exact same thing that happened. Once they recovered his remains, they were able to pretty clearly determine that it was just an accident. He just fell. Even though he was so experienced.
We just didn't have that investigation to make that conclusion.
Right. Even though he was so experienced, like, there's still a possibility that you can just fall in the dark, you know? And the investigation was handled so poorly that we have no idea. They didn't even search for the first 2 days. They spent the whole time trying to convince his friends with the reed technique that they murdered him. Like,
exactly. So this is one I heard about. This one right when I first started getting into, like, true crime podcasting and, like, YouTube and stuff a handful of years ago. And this is one, it's just like, it always, like, pops into my head, like, oh yeah, I still just don't know.
Right. It's very similar to an episode we just recorded that you guys in this timeline will have already heard, Dorothy Jane Scott. It's just, there's so many things that you're like, I'm going to put a question mark next to that and think about it for the rest of my life.
Yeah, when we recorded that, I don't know, 3-4 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just finishing up the research for this case.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're presenting that to me, I'm like, oh my God, it's so similar.
Right.
There's so many things we want to know that we just don't have answers for.
Right. Right.
But that is all that we have for you today. So thank you so much for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And you can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod. We just got a TikTok. It's HYHATC. Or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com. Thank you, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.